Greetings and salutations. I hope everyone is doing well today. Welcome to this upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you may know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. These audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? Alright guys, so today's upload is an experience that I have been talking to a gentleman that I personally know from before this channel had even started about this experience. And I got to give you a little bit of information, a little bit of background on what and where it occurred. Now, I live in the Adirondacks. I've had my own encounter in 1994. The majority of my life, I have battled drug addiction. I've been sober for 9 years. And when I was 17, I had my encounter. When I was 17, I was introduced to opiates. By the time I was 18, I was a full-on heroin addict. I never booted. I snorted. Thank God. But I was just, during my lifetime, though, I was trying to get sober. The whole period of time, I was using just to not be sick. And I had met a lot of amazing people through my search for sobriety. There is a place in upstate New York in Scroon Lake, and there is a non-denominational evangelical kind of word of life. Many of you may have heard the word of life. It is nationwide. It was founded in New York by a gentleman named Casper John Wiertzen, Jack. I got to meet him in 1995. It was like a year before he passed away. He was devoted to the Word of God. And they sponsored different sobriety walks and things like that. They keep a huge chunk of the Adirondacks pristine. They bought this beautiful island in Scroon Lake. I believe they are a huge contributor to the firework display that is up in Scroon Lake every 4th of July. Beautiful island. Well, this gentleman named Jack dedicated his life to the Word of God. And throughout my years, no one has ever tried to push religion down my throat. I was brought up Roman Catholic and Mohawk. I have family that lives on the reservation. A good friend of mine from the res, who I have not seen in forever, but we're still good friends, lives down in New York City. a lot of my belief and spiritual beliefs were from my heritage. And I combined a lot of it together. And strangely enough, when using, I wasn't your average user. I read a lot. And I read a lot of theology. I read paranormal, I read theology, anything and everything I could find, I read. So throughout all of this sobriety stuff, I got to meet some cool people. And I remember that sobriety walk that was sponsored by the Word of Life. And I met this pastor. And he was like 2 years younger than me. Really nice guy. Married at that time. Beautiful wife, 2 kids, like a baby and maybe a 2-year-old. And his life was dedicated to spreading the word of God. And you know, you don't have to agree with any religion. As long my belief is, as long as you believe Jesus is your savior and you know you admit your wrongs on a daily to him, I think you're good, you know. So he and I struck up this friendship. We're still friends to this day, and that's who I talked to right before making this video. So getting sober. Now, strange thing, this is where it all starts. Strange thing. Schroon Lake is, many of you might remember on the internet about 8 years ago, there was a guy who found a underground facility or underground kind of structure in the Adirondacks. And there was all of these small beds. He's hiking in Schroon Lake. He's hiking he's on the opposite side of the lake. So the town would be over here. The lake is here, the town, the Word of Life Island. And he's like over in here in the mountains, hiking deep. And he finds this like hatched door and he opens it up and he's like, what the hell? And he goes down in it and he finds all these pictures from like 1950s of kids. And he's like, what the, like the second he saw kids, he's like, oh no, but no, it was a military. And he's like, whoa. And he starts to look around and he's noticing the beds are beds, but they're not full-size beds. They're like child-sized beds in some of these wings of this deep underground facility that he had found. Many of you may remember this because there was like a website and there were some videos on YouTube about it. MK Ultra is supposedly what they were turning these kids into super soldiers, supposedly. I believe it. I believe that because of things that I've heard up here where I live. Also talking to my dad, and my dad has an extensive military background. So, anything he tells me, I will believe because 1, he doesn't lie. And 2, he doesn't say things just to say things. He's a man of very few words. But when he's got something to say, it's 100% true. Or he's yelling at somebody. So this guy finds this, and that has always struck me as weird, because the Word of Life, Jack, some of his books, a lot of his books were centered or directed towards youth, teens. And I've read a few because they're very interesting. And I can see how they would be directed towards teen. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look him up. His last name is spelled Wyrtzen, Jack. And he's got maybe 6, 7 books, maybe even more. I know of like 4. So I always found that kind of weird. Like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, they have this military facility with kids, 4 kids, and the Word of Life has all these, like summer camps and this and that. And that's back then when I was thinking, like, I was like conspiracy deep, I'm like, oh man, these are the recruiters and this and that. I don't believe that to be true anymore. But I would go deep dive on anything, back in the day. So I get sober and I call my friend, the pastor, up one day. I'm 6 months sober and I'm like, hey, how are you? And he's like, oh man, you sound great. And I'm like, I'm sober. I've got 6 months. I feel great. I don't drink. I don't smoke weed. I'm off everything. I smoke cigarettes and I drink coffee. And he's like, oh, in time, hopefully, God will help you put down your other bad habits. And I'm like, bro, you drink tons of coffee. Don't tell me, but, it was just, and then a year later, I start my channel. 2.5 years later, or 2 years later after that initial call, I call him up and I'm like, hey, how are you? And he said, oh, I'm doing great. He's like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm still sober. 2.5 years. It's my longest I've ever been sober. Actually, 6 months was the longest I'd ever been sober. So, now we are doing, extraordinarily well mentally for me. And I tell him, I'm like, listen, I started a YouTube channel. I've got 1,000 subscribers. And I love it, and I love talking to these people. I've made some great friends. They're awesome, and I talk about Dogman and paranormal. But my channel's name is Dogman with Jeff Nadolny, Dogman Encounters with Jeff Nadolny, and this and that. And he said, huh? And I'm like, instantly, I'm like, what do you mean, huh? Me being me. I was like, whoa, is he not think that's a good idea? Does he think I'm a loser? Because that's just back then in my, I was still in that addictive kind of look down on myself mind. And he said, no, there's not a lot I can talk about on this, but you said Dogman. And I said, yeah. I said, you didn't know I had an encounter? I never told you about my experience that I had in 94. And he's like, no. And I told him about it. And he said, holy cow, that's crazy. And he said, well, you've heard of the Michigan Dogman, right? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, I think that's where it all started. And I was like, no. I'm like, they have a song. I'm like, but it didn't all start there. I'm like, And he said, well, we are nationwide, and we had a retreat in an area called Gwynn Sawyer, and which is in the Upper Peninsula. I believe it's still an active case, he says. But the people who made it out of that retreat claim to have seen something very similar to what the Hollywood werewolves look like. Long tails, kind of dogs that walk on their hind legs, just very athletically inclined, violent creatures. And I said, that's Dogman. I said, I've never heard of, Gwynn Sawyer. I said, it's up in the Upper Peninsula. He said, there used to be an Air Force base up there. And he's from here. He's from this area. And, but as a pastor, he is in the inn. He's not just like, a pastor of 100 people. He's in the inn. He was a pastor of like 400 when he was 20. So he's he's in the know on things. But he said we had a retreat, and he said they were, things went real crazy real quick up there. But a lot of the people that were there and made it out claimed to have seen something like a Dogman. And I'm like, really? And he said, yeah. He said, I don't know how much more information I can share with you. He said, but, let me find out, and, don't say anything, he says. Because, one, I don't want to get in trouble. And two, it is an active case. And I don't want to jeopardize anything in case it wasn't what people are claiming it was. And I'm like, no problem, and then we let each other go. Periodically, I will contact him when I need to talk to somebody. Like if I'm not feeling good in my recovery, or if I'm feeling like a crappy dad or a crappy person, I will contact him, and 15, 20 minutes into the conversation, I'm good. Because we will not talk about religion. He will mention Jesus' name, but when you're talking about Jesus and his life, that's at that point, that's not religion, that's spirituality. And, so about a year ago, I contacted him, and I told him, hey, I had a pretty good influx on this channel. I'm at like 85,000 subs now. And he's like, holy, wow, that is amazing, Jeff. I'm like, yeah, I got custody of the kids. I'm still sober. I feel like I'm doing good things. I feel like I'm sharing information that I should be sharing. And I told him, how I talk about how I share experiences, but how I research in these strange attacks and my obsession with the Tom Mezek case. And he said, that's scary. He said, that's a real scary obsession, but, you have a calling. And when he said that, I was like, whoa, I do have a calling. This is my calling, is to, even if I didn't have this channel, I like, let's say tomorrow the channel, YouTube just goes away. I'm still going to have this stuff down here and still go to where Tom Mezek disappeared. I'm still going to try and talk to people, and I brought up, I said, hey, I've never talked about what me and you talked about a couple years ago on my channel, but do you know any more information on that? And he said, a little bit, but let me give you a call back. You caught me at not a great time right now, and I'll fill you in. He's like, I think I can share as much as I can, as much as I know, and maybe a little more. And I said, awesome, thank you. And that brings us to yesterday's phone call, because I wasn't feeling very good at all yesterday. And I left that conversation with some information, and I left that conversation knowing that Jesus is walking with me on a daily basis. So, all right, so I call my friend, the pastor, up, and immediately, hey, how are you? He is happy to hear from me. He's like, hey, how are you? He goes, I've been thinking about calling you. He goes, do you remember our last conversation? And I said, yeah. He said, which part? And I said, well, I'm like, the Dogman part? And he said, yes. He goes, there's a second part that I wanted to talk to you about. He said, I looked into that book that you shared with me. He said, wow, that's very interesting. He said, I did a deep dive on it. And he said, it's pretty cool. I'm like, well, awesome. And we were talking about, like I said, when I was getting sober and when I was using, I would read anything I could. And gosh, 2000, I had met a person who, they have very famous parents, and they're sort of famous, but they turned me on to a book called The Urentia, and it's a very interesting book. It's a theologian book, and I shared it with the pastor, and he said, that's very interesting. He said, but, and it's here right now because I just got off the phone with him, and we were talking a little bit about that and the experience. So he said, I think it's time that you share that experience that happened in the Gwynn-Sawyer region. And I said, okay. I said, well, I'm all ears. And he said, let me call somebody. And I said, I said, well, usually when I do this is, one, I want to hear about, what you know and what they know and this and that. Can I record this? And he's like, no. He's like, absolutely not. He said, one, I don't want my name being attached to this. He said it happened way before I was even a pastor. He was a member, but he said, just let's leave it at this. Talk to me and talk to this person that I'm going to introduce you to. You can use her name. Just don't use her last name, and don't say where she lives. And I said, all right. I said, awesome, cool, thank you. And he puts me on hold, comes back, the phone's ringing, and he said, are you there? And I'm right here. He said, awesome. A lady answers her phone, and he says, hello. I have my friend, and she immediately is excited to hear from him. He's not her pastor. They just know each other from retreats and teachings and whatnot. Apparently she's very big in the evangelical world, I guess. I don't really know how to go about saying it, but she's very excited, and he goes, I have my friend Jeff on the phone. And apparently he told her, my history, how he knows me and who I am, my addiction battle, and this and that in the channel. And she said, before I could even say hi, she said, it's a pleasure to get to speak with you tonight. She said, I'm looking forward to it. She said, how are you? And I was like, whoa, this, it was just this kind of really warm feeling, when you talk to somebody that is so just at peace with themselves and at peace with Jesus, you're just like, wow. And I'm probably sounding corny right now, but I don't care. 2009 in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is when this occurred, in the Gwynn-Sawyer region. Now, Gwynn kind of sits below Sawyer, and Sawyer was the Air Force, I think, or Air Force Base. I believe it was K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base, and it was closed in the late 90s. So it's now just this unincorporated or incorporated area. It's just beautiful recreational area. There's just a lot of camps and a lot of lodges and this and that and snowmobiling. There's something like 40 something lakes up there. It's just beautiful. So they are having this Word of Life retreat. They are meeting or working together with another kind of biblical or Bible study group. Not Word of Life, but something basically almost the same. Because once again, it's a non-denominational. And I don't know anything about organized religion, and I'm not going to claim I do. I hear non-denominational and I think of Unitarian. But so they are up there and they rent this just beautiful lodge. Something like 14 or 15 bedrooms and huge kind of sprawling, land all around it, woods all around it. And on the premises is the main lodge with these 14, 15 bedrooms. Each has its own bathroom. Just this pristine, beautiful, expensive, whatever, someplace that I will never, ever go to. And never have the opportunity to go to it. You know what I mean? Like, I think going to Motel 8 is great. But it has like a meeting conference hall in it. So it is an older lodge, but owned by rich corporation that just expanded and made it this, made it what it is. It's for retreats and different things, and not religious retreats, not just religious retreats, but all kind of company retreats and this and that. And on the premises, there are singular cabins. So there's about 10 singular cabins with 2 or 3 bedrooms. And they are all up there. It's late fall. And a lot of the kids that are up there with their families are homeschooled because of just their beliefs and such. Some families do have their kids go to school and others don't. Others, their moms will teach them and stuff, and they have like group kind of. It's almost like a school, but it's sponsored by the Word of Life, I guess. So there's all these kids up there, and it's fall. It's crisp. It's cool. It's clean, and they're all just there for 9-day retreat. And they get settled. One of the kids at this point is seen or was seen by a groundskeeper from the lodge. He worked for the lodge, not for the Word of Life, but he worked for the lodge. And it was about 10:30 at night, and he had been just wandering around. Apparently he couldn't sleep. He was not up to no good. It was just he couldn't sleep, and he just went out to get some fresh air, and he was off going towards this small kind of lake that is near this lodge, which is not very far. It's right on the property, but the groundskeeper is doing his nightly check. He's got a golf cart that he's driving around, and he spots the kid, and he's drives up to him and he says, "Hey, listen, I don't know if anyone told you, but
there are wild animals up here, bud, that can hurt you. He said, I honestly suggest not being out here at night. And it was part of, we let your group know that not to have people, running around, walking around late at night. That, if you are going to go with somebody, go with a few people, have a buddy system, because there are, wolves, there's other things up here that, can harm you. And we don't, on top of, you could fall in the water and drown. More of a liability, right? So he gets the kid onto the golf cart and he drives up and he walks into the lodge, and there are employees of the lodge, so it's not just these people on the retreat. There are employees, there are cooks, there is wait staff, there is housing, there reception and everything. So he brings the kid to the reception area and, lets the people know, the main reception lady know, hey, I just found him here. Where can you have his mom or dad or someone come down, so I can explain the benefits of listening to what we have to say, because he was over by the lake. And so Caroline comes out and she is with this young man's mom and dad. Her and her husband were all doing some sort of study, whatever. So they all come out and he says something, along the lines of, hey, he's not in trouble, but we have, it's different up here. I know that you guys are, spread out in the country, but, wherever you're from, we're in the Upper Peninsula. There's a lot of things up here that, this young man might not make it home some night. And also, we don't want him by the water at night. It's a liability, but there are things out in those woods that may attack him. And when he said may attack him, he hadn't said that to the boy. He had just said, just be careful. He was being very kid-friendly. But when the adults, and then the boy turned and looked at him like, what could attack me? Because he had pretty much said wolves, and, not wolves are going to attack you, kid. Don't go in the fucking woods. But, but kids, as kids are, what's going to attack me? Now, he's curious. He's 13. So, of course, Caroline looks at him and says, oh, thank you. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. And don't worry, we'll address everybody in our group tomorrow at breakfast and let everyone know, about the buddy system and this and that. All right, thank you, And I think, or Caroline thinks that he might have been in the impression that their organization was going to be like kind of jerkish to him, because this lodge retreat area is not exactly a cheap place to stay. But when you have a multitude of people and you have a rich evangelical kind of church thing like this, money gets spent, So he's shakes everyone's hand and says goodnight to everybody. And he's walking away. And Caroline tells everyone, hang on a second, I'll catch back up with you. And she runs over to the guy and she says, thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you again. She said, but, we did a little research, and, we know that there are there's black bear, there's wolves, there's this and that, and, possibly lynx, possibly bobcat. But my husband and I heard, as we were driving up here, when we stopped at a gas station, one of the guys said, they said, oh, you're not from around here. Where are you heading? And we told them. And he said something about, be careful of the Michigan Dogman. She goes, what's that? She goes, and is that what you're talking about? Is it some sort of urban legend, or, is it a real animal? Because I've never heard of it. And she's curious. She's not just blowing smoke up the guy's ass. She's curious. And he says, well, ma'am, supposedly there are creatures that live in these woods, and it's not just the Dogman. He's like, I've heard of Sasquatch. People up here have seen these things. People up here have seen the Dogman. And it's a man-sized wolf-like creature, except it's got triple strength than a man does. It's also bigger than a human, by a good couple of feet. And then obviously you've heard of Bigfoot, which dwarfs humans. They're huge. And she's like, so they are real. Have you seen one? And he said, I've seen eyes just in these woods out here. He said, actually, he said a couple of months back in the summertime, he said we had one of these retreats up here. He said, and a group of kids were on the dock by the lake. He said, and I had to drive out there and say, hey, it's past dock time. Because there is, this company owns this property, so they own, it's their rules. They don't want to get sued for teenage kids fucking off and drowning, So as he pulls up and he starts to talk to the kids, adolescents, teenagers, whatever you want to call them, he is on the dock and he's kind of talking. And he's like, I realized I was talking to myself because these kids are 16, 17 years old. They don't give a crap what I'm saying. He said, and I look out toward the woods because I'm about ready to give up and just drive away. He said, and I see these red dots just pop, pop, two, pop, pop, two, pop, pop, two. It was almost like 3 or 4 of these things just happen to open their eyes or happen to walk up at that point in the woods. And I'm watching them just appear in front of me. I can't see their bodies, I can't see their faces, but I can see these glowing red eyes. He said, and I'm looking. He said, I'm a little perplexed at first because I'm like, what the hell? Until it blinks. And he said, ma'am, once I saw the blink, he said, I knew. He said, so I grabbed one of the kids and I said, look, man, look over there. And he said, I just helped him, look, check this out. Do you see what I'm seeing? And sure enough, this dock of teenage boys and girls all see it. And they see these blinking eyes. 3 sets. Doop, 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 He said, get on the cart, let's go. And he's got one of those small dump body golf carts. Just, the back is this big. It's a dump body. Get on the golf cart and I'll bring you back to the lodge. Let's go. And he does. And he said, so I've seen things like that, but I've never seen. He said, I know a few people that have seen the Dogman. He said, and people have been chased by these things. He said, I don't know anybody that's been, physically mauled or killed by one. He said, but I know people that claim to have been chased by them. So he gets the kids back to the lodge, and that's his response to Caroline. Couple days go by, and everything's fine. There's really nothing, the only person that was kind of in the know was Caroline, and I think she had told her husband. She hadn't told anyone else other than her husband about the conversation. And they had looked up the Michigan Dogman song and listened to it and played it a couple times. And at that point, she wasn't taking it seriously because in their eyes, it was just another urban legend. It was just something to tell the kids to keep them in at night. So everything's going smoothly. Their retreat is going as it's meant to go. The kids from whatever grade up to early, late teen have a youth pastor that is with them, and they are responsible for kind of their schooling and their religious or their spiritual guidance and stuff. And they have everything's planned on this retreat. So, there's an itinerary for the adults, an itinerary for the kids. And about 3 days before the retreat is going to be over, one of the itineraries for the youth is that they are going to go on a hike with the youth pastor, and there's this area where they can sit. It's a good ways away from the lodge, not too far away, but a good hike away. But they're going to sit and they can converse, talk about spirituality, talk about the teachings of Christ, and this and that. And so that youth pastor has their, kind of everything that's going to be discussed. And they all head out to this location. Now it's after lunch, so it's still a decent, beautiful day. It's a little chilly. She said, I remember it being a little chilly that day. I remember the day perfectly. She said, I remember that that 9 days of being up there there was some rain, there was some sun, but it was definitely, you needed a hoodie, a fall jacket, a vest, whatever you need. You're in the Upper Peninsula, so but it's a beautiful day. So they go and they hike, and they are there doing their thing, and nothing. Caroline wasn't there. She is getting this. This is secondhand information from that youth pastor. So they are done with whatever their kind of retreat or outing of that day. They're done with their outing, and they are debating on, the pastor had debated on, we can either head back to the lodge and wait until after dinner to do marshmallows and kind of do a daily thanking, or what we are thankful for at this day. Or we can gather some firewood. We can make a small little fire pit. They had permission already. Everything, that you're on a private lodged area, you're going to ask for permission. So, can we, if we decide to, have a little fire, not a bonfire, but just this little, and by the lake, not the lake on the lodge. There's, like I said, there's water all around these guys. So the kids, obviously, kids are going to be kids. Shit, yeah, let's have marshmallows right now. Who wants to go back to the lodge and be bored by our mom and dad, So exactly, that's what they do. They all gather some stones, they make a little fire pit, and they gather some sticks. The pastor had marshmallows in their backpack. They got their marshmallow sticks, their roasting sticks, whittled them quick, sharpened them for making their marshmallows. Now, as all of this had happened, they had left the lodge a little after 1-ish. They were doing their outing for about 2 hours prior to ending it. So now we're at like 3 p.m. And by the time they had gathered everything and started the fire, got it going to where it was good enough to do, marshmallows, not a huge fire, but enough, some coals burnt, And now we are at like 4:30 in the Upper Peninsula, and it's just starting to get dark. So they now are done with their marshmallows. All right, guys, let's gather some water, in your water bottles. Fill your water bottles up, pour some water on the fire, make sure it's out, and then we'll head back to the lodge and get ready for dinner and such. But, great day, guys. They start to walk out, and as they are walking, the youth pastor is last in line. There is kind of their assistant is leading the way, and the kids are in the middle. And as they're walking, the pastor is counting heads because something looked off. They couldn't figure out what it was at first. So they count heads, and they realize that there are 2 less heads than what we had coming in. So they are, now aware we're missing 2 people. He says to the assistant, he stops the group real quick, walks up to the assistant, and as he's walking up, he's looking at the kids, and he's trying to figure out who's not there, and the assistant, he tells his, hey, we're missing 2 kids. How did we miss 2 kids when I counted heads at the, when we were doing marshmallows? Now we're minus 2. And the assistant says, did we count after we sent everyone for water? And he said it was before. It was when we were sitting around in the talk circle that I counted. And he goes, oh my God. And he just takes off running back to, and they hadn't been walking very long, maybe 5 minutes. Runs back to where had just been. He gets there, and he can hear the group coming up. He didn't say a word. He just, when he realized the last time they had been seen was 20 something minutes ago, because they had been doing marshmallows, then they were done. Then they said, all right, it's time to pick up. Let's get water on the fire. But they had just done that head count during that period. So now they're 20, 25 minutes unaccounted for by a lake. He realizes that it's two adolescent boys, 13 to 14 years of age, and both decent swimmers, decent kids. That was his main, oh my God, what if they fell in the water? Well, it's shore right there, but they're both pretty good swimmers because of their age. And he passes the fire pit, gets to the shoreline, and is looking up and down the shoreline, turns to look. And as he looks off to the side, he can see the group of kids and his assistant come in. He's frantic because at first when he saw the first couple of kids rolling in, he was like, oh, and he looks back that way and he spots something off in the distance and he runs up quick, and it's one of the kids' water bottles, one of their Word of Life kind of travel water bottle. And he's like, oh no. So he immediately goes to the assistant. They set the kids down. He's very worked up because, one, he's responsible for these kids. Two, I have a water bottle, but where's the other kid? Where's the two kids? And he goes and tells the assistant and tells the kids, hey, listen, when was the last time you saw X and Y? Because right now we just realized that the last time we did a head count was when we were doing marshmallows. But now we're talking 40 minutes in. And he's kind of looking for his phone. He gets his phone out of his backpack with, the itinerary and everything in. And it's, an old Nokia phone. It wasn't like what we have now. He makes a call to Caroline and Caroline's husband, because Caroline is responsible for this retreat. Actually, her husband and her are. He proceeds to say, hey, I don't know what to do, but we went in with X amount, now we have two less. We're at where we were. The last head count I did was 20 minutes before we started to walk out. We started walking out, and that's when I realized that we're minus 2 people. I just found one of their water bottles. And it's getting dark. It's getting dark now. And he looks at his assistant and he says, listen, he said, can you get back to the lodge with the kids? And he said, kids, I've got to stay back. I'm gonna start looking for, X and Y. But you guys, it's getting dark and I want you guys to get back to camp or back to the lodge. So follow. He's in charge. So just please. And, a few of them are like, let me stay back and help. Let me stay back and help. And he's like, listen, I appreciate the help, but you gotta go. You gotta go, okay? And during the conversation, the kids are getting ready to head out, and they hear this kind of pitter-patter of feet moving. The kids are quieted now because they all kind of, and they see one of the boys running through the woods back towards where they were. He looks very disoriented, and he's got blood on his shirt. There's a lot going on visually, because he's completely it looks like he was lost for a year, but he had only been missing for an hour. And there's a lot of blood on his shirt, like more than a bloody nose. So he immediately runs up to the boy, and he's like, hey, are you okay? Where is he? Where did you guys go? What happened? Multitude of questions he can't answer because you keep asking questions, and that was per Caroline because of how the youth pastor had told her. He's like, I didn't even give him time. He goes, I just wanted to know where the other one was. And he makes a statement of, we went to get water. He said, and we turned around, and we saw kind of like what we thought was a tail kind of trotting out into the woods. So we thought it'd be cool to find out and see what it was. Maybe it was a lost dog, we didn't know what it was, but we went to look for it really quick. He said, and the next thing I know, we're where the tail was, looking into the woods, and off in the distance, we see these two eyes kind of what looked like glowing red. And the youth pastor kind of puts his hand on him, and he goes, all right, he goes, where is he? Where's, X and Y? Where's Y? He said, I don't know. I don't know what happened. He was there. We were both there. We started to walk towards this thing. He said, and all of a sudden, I'm walking next to him, looking at this thing with red eyes, and he said, something just hit me and him, both of us. He said, I fell, and when I got back up, he said, I had blood on my shirt, and he was gone. He said, and my head, and he puts his hand on his head, and he takes it, and he's got blood on his head. He said, I think I hit my head. And the youth pastor's like, oh, like, what do you mean something hit you guys? He said, all right. He makes the call again. I have one of them. He's hurt. He's disoriented. I don't know what to do. I'm going to look for the other boy. I think he's able to walk back to camp, but do you think you can have someone else come out and meet us out here? We don't know what to do, This is something that you're not bargaining to have happen because it's never happened before anywhere. And they do a lot of camping and, outings, youth outings, and this and that. So sets him over with the assistant youth pastor and the kids, and they're all talking to him and trying to console him. And the youth pastor just walks straight out to where he was last seen. almost in a straight line of where that young man just came from. And he keeps walking and he keeps walking and he sees a pair of shoes on the ground. And he's like, and he thinks about the kid. And he's like, those are his hiking sneakers. Those are his trail sneakers. He's like, oh my, and there's blood on them. And he stops and he looks at them and he's right about to pick them up. He's just right there. And something stopped him. He's like, in case anything, he said, I'm not going to touch them. He goes, that way we know where they are. He takes a piece of paper out of his pack and he kind of puts it, he takes a stick and puts the paper under one of the sneakers. So he's got, a white piece of paper in dusk woods. You can now visibly see it a little better than, he's trying to make markers. He doesn't have anything else, he's got a couple pens, his cell phone, and a notebook, an itinerary, clipboard, nothing. So he looks at the shoes and he goes to say a prayer. And as he goes to look up at God to say a prayer and to say, help me. And as he puts his head up, he looks and he sees what he can only describe as this teenage young boy kind of in the air, not screaming, he looks unconscious or dead at this point. And he sees what he can only describe as a werewolf. Growing up, he's a youth pastor. He's not, he's seen horror movies, and he said, just like in the Van Helsing movies and anything, he said, that's what that thing looked like. He said, and as I looked up, he said, I had to do a double take because I could see the boy, and he said, I could see this thing, and it had the boy kind of like by his head holding him off the tree, looking down at him. And he said, I'm looking, and I said, I took a second look and I looked back because what I was seeing was not something that you're supposed to see. He said it smiled. He said it had that German Shepherd kind of, that smile, that look to it, that mischievous kind of evil look in its eyes, and it just dropped that young man maybe 40 feet from where this Dogman was down. And he backs up because he's going to get hit possibly, but he doesn't, what's he going to do? Catch him? So he can only just kind of back up and pray that he may be still alive. And he hears the sickening thwap of this young man's body hitting the frickin' ground, hard ground, because there are rock and, it's not just smooth backyard land. This is mountain area. You've got rocks. And he looks back up. He looks at the boy and he looks back up because he's now, all right, is this thing going to come and get me? And he looks back at it and it's staring dead at him. And he's frozen in fear. And it points. He said it pointed at me. He said this thing, its eyes were red, and it pointed at me, and it made a gesture like that, come here, with one finger, like that. But it's in a tree. He said I had no choice. He said I looked at he said I felt for a pulse. He said it was faint. It was so faint. He said, I know that I shouldn't have. He said, but I didn't want to. He said, I'm afraid. I'm scared. But this thing, I'm terrified of this. But I also can't leave this young man here. And the thing I wanted to say when he had him in the tree and dropped him was when he backed up also. Caroline said that the young man was not. You know how when you're teenage, there's different body types of teenagers. You got a little chubby, kind of chubby, a little shorter, and then in 2 years he gets his growth growth, whatever, and he's now 6'1" and slender looking. He was a little chubby. And he's like, and he goes and he picks him up and he does kind of like a fireman's carry, and he starts to run back to where the other kids are and his assistant. And he's, a good distance away, not too far away. And he hears the exact sound as if a cat or a animal is climbing up or down a tree. You hear the debarking and digging as these claws are used on this tree. He's got him over his shoulders and he's running, and he turns and looks and he sees the Dogman now descending out of the tree. And he immediately just pushes as hard as he can. He gets back to where everyone is and he puts the boy down, and he's out of breath, and he turns back to look, and there's nothing there, or nothing that they can see, because at this point now it is dark. He gets a call. It's Caroline, the maintenance or service guy, is coming down the trail. He's got a golf cart, and there's another guy coming with a golf cart to get you guys out of there. How is everybody? Did you find the other boy? Yeah, I found him. He's not well. He's barely alive. I'll tell you everything when I get back to the lodge. You're probably not going to believe me, but I've got nothing else to say or, verify this to you other than the position that these two young men are in. They get everyone, the maintenance guy and another worker comes. They get everyone on these golf carts. The two boys are laid. One is laid in the back of one, and the other is laid in the back of the other. And everyone's on. There's an immediate head count. The second he's like, don't leave yet. ... Head count done. Assistant's here. I'm here. All right, let's go. And as they're kind of turning onto the trail, turning back around to get onto the trail, the youth pastor looks out into the woods and he sees that gray Dogman, this just like charcoal colored gray Dogman, the burning hellfire eyes. It's dusk out, but you can still see its outline and that its hair color is darker than the dusk light at this point, but you can still visibly see the color. And he's turning and he's keeping his eye on it because he doesn't know if this thing's gonna hit the golf cart, come running. And it shows him his teeth once again. It may have been a growl. It was not malicious or malevolent like that one was when he dropped that young man. This was more or less like, stay out of here, kind of like, get out. And they get back to the camp. Shortly thereafter, law enforcement arrives on the scene. Youth pastor is questioned. The assistant is questioned. All the kids are questioned. Both the boys are brought to a hospital, which was a distance away. Law enforcement proceeds to wait because now it's dark and everyone is present. But per Caroline to the youth pastor, it was decided that what you saw was a large cat, a very large kind of mountain lion that just attacked these two boys. She goes and tells the young man who came running out of the woods, do you remember what that mountain lion looked like? And he's like, they weren't mountain lions. They were this. And she says, listen, I know. But so, and she feels bad to this day that she had to manipulate a child, but it was for the greater good. And I'm only doing that, Pastor, if you're watching this, I'm only doing that because you know exactly what I'm talking about, and we'll still be friends after this too. But that it was a mountain lion or a large wild cat. The story is told to law enforcement. Law enforcement the next day goes out. The youth pastor and the assistant are questioned extensively. Mind you, there's 2 days left of this retreat. And they are told that they are now they are getting looked at. They're subjects of this investigation. And they are then interviewed the next morning. They interview the kids. The kids all back the youth pastor and his assistant that it was neither one of them that hurt either one of those two boys. One, they were all with us, and how would they do that much damage? It's just so they go out and they make the youth pastor go with them. He's very hesitant to go back out there. He doesn't want to. Caroline's husband goes with them as well. And he's looking for that paper with the shoes on it. What they do, they get to that area. He immediately recognizes the area because he got to the old fire pit. And as he walks out just a little, he sees the paper is right there. But there's a rock placed on that paper and those shoes are gone. And he looks at law enforcement and says, listen, that rock was not there. That's the paper I left to mark where the shoes were. What do we do? You can't, da-da-da. All right, thank you. this and that. And they proceed to walk around and look. They find the other water bottle. The young man that was snatched up and dropped, he suffered quite a bit of paralyzing damage. He's paralyzed from the waist down to this day. Still a member of the church, but the youth pastors are then told that they are no longer subjects of the investigation. What is told is that it was a mountain lion, but there was some speculation from the law enforcement because there was what appeared to be human tracks in sneakers, hiking sneakers, going up to, where those shoes were. There's mud and, dirt, and so they got an imprint, but they never got an imprint of a large cat. Well, there would be if it was a large cat, and, these are leaving imprints. There should have been. He goes up and around, they're looking, and he sees a set of plates walking toward the woods. Just huge paw plate, as big as pie plates. Just walking into the woods. Youth pastor, let's get out of here. I can't be out here anymore. They go. About 2-3 months later, that young man is brought back to his home, his family, his hospital, whatever. And everything is then turned upside down for the organization for about a year. There's inner turmoil because of the lies to law enforcement and to this and that. But then there's not, because was it a lie? No, it was just not shared. That young man, paralyzed from the waist down still, does not remember how he got up the tree. He remembers looking down at his friend and just being dropped, hitting the ground so hard. It's just, imagine having that be your last memory of what happened during your, you're doing marshmallows 1 second, getting water for it, and the next thing you're getting dropped 40-something feet off the air. Law enforcement, everything's done. Someone from the hospital had broke HIPAA law, announced that there was a kid that was attacked by a wild animal, and immediately everything was quashed real quick. Why? Because if you have a negative, look, they don't want to be responsible for anything. They did back their own people, their congregation. So they end up paying off the person who spoke to the news agency and the news agency, so there wouldn't be any kind of mention of the incident, that it happened. The other little boy is now a youth minister of his own. And like I said, the other one is waist down, paralysis. and still to this day has a humor about everything that's just so strange. But he's a youth pastor. And a lot has changed because they just, when there is a outing, they kind of adventure or whatever is done much closer. And that's the big thing of this to me is money. Money got the media to keep it quiet. But also, I wish Victor was still with us, because I'm curious if he had discussed that there were breeding program areas throughout the United States. Supposedly, there's, or what if, supposedly there's some in Michigan and area and stuff, in Minnesota and all of that area, Wisconsin. But what if at Sawyer Air Force Base, the old Sawyer Air Force Base, what if there is some sort of breeding program there as well? What if? You know, I mean, we would never know. So, my question, I asked Caroline the question after. I said, so let me ask you something. Now, one thing that popped into my head immediately was when that youth pastor looked up to say a prayer, right? I said, do you think these things are demonic? Because, you know, I explained this to Caroline. I said, you know, there are people that believe 100% without a shadow of a doubt these things are demonic, right? And that you will be okay in the woods against one of these creatures without a firearm, with just prayer. And her response was very interesting, because she said, I think that prayer will help without a shadow of a doubt, but I believe that you do need to have protection when in the woods. Because, like I said this 1,000 times, even if you don't come up against one of these creatures, there are other things out there that will not respond to prayer. Like a bear, or a mountain lion, or a pack of coyote. You know, like, but this is where she got me. Because I was like, well, you know, I said, it's almost like prayer almost didn't work right there. Or it didn't seem like it worked. And she said, but if you think about when he stopped to pray, he was searching for that young man. He stops to say a prayer, and he looks up. And yes, the creature dropped the boy. And yes, he is paralyzed. But he's alive. If he didn't look up in prayer at that moment, would that boy have been dropped? We don't know. You may speculate and say, yeah, sure. But we don't know. So yeah, she got me. Prayer, 100% does work. It worked in that one because he stopped to pray and the boy was dropped right there, alive. Thank God.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for the truth. God bless you all.